Welcome to Data Magic, Project Unicorn's official podcast. I'm Tisha Peters, and in each episode, we'll explore how better data can unlock smart decisions, stronger systems, and create real impact for students. Project Unicorn is a national initiative dedicated to radically improving data interoperability, which is the safe and secure flow of education data across systems to support student learning. We talk with leaders, practitioners, and partners who are making data usable, connected, and meaningful for the people who need it most. Because when data flows, educators don't just see more, they can do more, and that's where the magic happens. Today, I'm excited to welcome Brittany Miller to talk about her work as the Chief Innovation Officer and Executive Director for the Centers for Outcome-Based Contracting. Welcome, Brittany. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Tisha. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
Can you tell our listeners what OBC is all about? Why was it developed? Where did it come from? What's the work?
Yeah, great. So OBC refers to outcomes-based contracting, and the outcomes-based contracting model was developed here at the Center for OBC for K-12, specifically for instructional services. The way that the model works is to support districts and providers with developing a contract where a large portion of the payment to the provider is contingent on meeting agreed upon student outcomes. In our standards, we outline a minimum of 40% of that payment is contingent on meeting measurable, meaningful, and malleable outcomes for students, typically associated with their academic growth and academic achievement in the content area, either mathematics or literacy as a part of the work. And so that's like the technical definition of OBC. What I would say is the real purpose of OBC, or where we see that magic happen on the theme of data magic, is that it allows a district and provider to move from a transactional relationship where the provider is selling a service and the district is maybe implementing it, kind of, maybe not, depending on where you are in the country, and kind of hoping for the best, into a relationship where the district and provider are truly in partnership on behalf of student outcomes because they've identified those outcomes. They've identified exactly how they're going to measure them, how they will pay for them, and the purpose for the specific students to be served under the contract in advance of any dollars being exchanged or any dotted lines being signed. And that creates a really transformational way for districts and providers to come together and really realize what's possible with the innovations in the market to actually impact student learning effectively.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that. And when I first heard about outcomes-based contracts a few years ago, I thought, wow, we're finally holding vendors responsible. But that when I talked with you the first time, you just mentioned again, is that mutual accountability. And so really making sure that we're not just bringing on tools into schools and then letting them sit on a shelf, but actually in the contract talking about how it will be used and the implementation. So can you talk more about that mutual accountability? What does that mean? And then what are the results when an outcomes-based contract is implemented?
Yeah, so mutual accountability is one of our 5 domains within our standards of excellence. It's something that we really hold near and dear to the way that we partner with folks and how we memorialize those agreements within a contract that the district and provider are signing together. And so what that refers to is the clear responsibilities that are actually measurable of the provider and the district as a part of the contract terms, in order to either uh, be eligible for payment on the provider side for those contingent outcomes, or be eligible to hold your provider accountable for the contingent outcome payments on the district side and not have to pay for the contingent payments regardless. And so the way that this actually looks when we're talking about educational technology interventions is that the provider is, of course, responsible for making sure that students achieve the outcomes that are a part of the contract. Again, typically growth and proficiency on nationally normed assessments. We recommend that they're not actually a part of that provider's platform unless it is a nationally normed assessment. And then for the district, and this is where a lot of folks are like, oh, that's new. The district is responsible for making sure that students have the proper dosage according to the research base from the ed tech intervention in order to actually lead to student outcomes, right? And so that's how it works in ed tech. We do this work in tutoring and in professional learning, which I'm happy to talk a little bit more about if it's helpful, but wanted to stick with that one just given the scope of this podcast. And what that does when you say, okay, provider, you're responsible for this stuff, district, you're responsible for this stuff, is that the two parties can really come together and hold one another accountable for actually getting to the thing that matters most, which of course is the experience of a student in the classroom and their outcomes.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing the details about that. So it's really about working together to make sure the students are learning. Um,
Yeah,
can
and I
you
think
tell us?
like one of
Yeah,
the ways that we talk about it, if you're, any sort of teaching background is like you would never ask your teachers to get up in front of a room of students and not have a lesson plan, right? And so we think of the
it's
OBC
true.
as your year-long lesson plan in terms of how are you as a district and a provider going into partnership to implement something effective for kids and having a plan for what that looks like and all the contingencies along the way in order to get the instruction done for kids.
Love that. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with education data?
Yeah. So this is a question that Tisha and I have talked about offline as well, that,
Yes.
I come from a practitioner perspective. I have my doctorate in curriculum studies and teaching. And so while I really value data, obviously, quantitative and qualitative data to really understand what's working for whom under what conditions, I'm not, somebody that had a really deep background, particularly in the technical elements of how data works within systems. And I've become increasingly engaged and interested in that through my work in OBC. But as a quick anecdote, when I was an instructional leader in Denver Public Schools, I was the chief of staff for academics. And one of the first things that I was assigned when I stepped into that role was to be the academics representative for the data governance committee for the district. And so that
Wow.
was a lot of words. And I said, why and what is that? I kind of laugh back on that now because I understand how important data governance is and making sure that data is moving safely, securely, interoperably in order to really make sure that everybody understands what's happening for kids. And at the time, all that I understood is that I needed instruction to improve in classrooms, and I needed the tools that students were using to actually work for them in order to improve outcomes for kids. Now, what the outcomes-based contracting work has done and really changed my perspective on things like data governance and interoperability and all the data magic that you all talk with lots of technologists about on this podcast is that once you start focusing in on the thing that matters most for academic leaders, which is the actual outcomes that students need to achieve in order for them to be successful in the next grade level, in life, in school, et cetera, it becomes a whole lot easier for the academics people to come to the table and say, I now understand why I have to focus on the data infrastructure that makes all of this tick in the background. And that's where I think OBC can be really transformational for thinking about how you get all of the right stakeholders at the table to really understand what's needed from everybody to make data magic happen.
Wow, that is so important to think about. And thank you for sharing your background. It's fun when at a district you get tapped to be part of something that's outside of your scope and you've never thought about, but it brings such a big, rich opportunity to really understand how everything's working together. You mentioned a few things, and it makes me wonder what mistakes are districts making when they're evaluating education technology tools. There are so many tools out there. We hear huge numbers of tools that schools are using on average. What are your thoughts on looking at and bringing on ed tech tools?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tisha. And I think that the first mistake is that we're asking the wrong question. So
Okay.
instead of asking what ed tech tools are we going to bring on, we need to start with the students in the classroom that are impacted by these and their teachers that are engaging with them every day, right? So when we start with the question, who are our students and what are their greatest academic needs? What are the ways that we're going to measure whether or not they're successful with meeting those academic needs? Then it just like flips the conversation on its head. And then we can start talking about what tools are most appropriate in order to meet the needs of students. But all too often, we think about an ed tech tool or any kind of instructional product as a one size fits all. Well, you and I both know that if you've been around education for long enough, there is no one size fits all. And while ed tech tools in particular can create really personalized learning experiences for students on their learning trajectory, that does not mean that the same ed tech tool that is appropriate for a struggling first grader will be appropriate for an eighth grader that's actually looking to accelerate their instruction, right? And so really understanding who the students are that you want to serve, and then talking about what are we actually trying to achieve before you talk about the quality of the ed tech tool or which one to bring in, really provides that opportunity to get more aligned from the start all the way down to the classroom level, which what is going to be the coherent learning experience for the student in the classroom, and what's a meaningful and research-backed intervention or product that is actually going to support that student's learning trajectory, so that everybody across the system understands what they have to do to implement that tool effectively.
That's an incredible approach and totally flips what most of us are asking, what I asked you. What should I look for when I'm looking at ed tech tools? And that's the wrong question completely. So is there something that the vendors themselves can do to communicate that clearly, who the students are that they serve, what their goals and purposes are, what their research backing is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we're in a world where we need to really move away from a one size fits all for ed tech in the classroom. We've seen that over and over again, and there's plenty of research that cites how little ed tech is used. Well, we're also purchasing ed tech for huge systems where every kid across the district is going to get a license for fill in the blank tool, right? And that's not necessarily appropriate. The other thing that it really limits is what is the actual total cost of ownership for implementing an ed tech tool, right? Frequently, what we see advertised in your typical ed tech product is use this for 30 minutes a week and it'll make miracles happen for your students, right? While there is incredible power in the way that ed tech can impact students in the classroom, 30 minutes a week is not actually what's happening there. And that's where we start to get into the dosage. So, what our providers under outcomes-based contracting have started to do is really analyze for specific grade levels and for specific performance levels for students. What does it actually look like for them to hit that metric in terms of how many stories does a student actually have to read within the platform? How many problems do they have to solve? What does it look like for them to complete a certain number of lessons, right? Those are the rigorous tasks and texts that I think ed tech companies also are undervaluing in their own product if they don't include that information, right? Because it's not just about sitting in front of a computer and, like watching a YouTube video. We're talking about really complex tools that have that learning science embedded in them. And so it's the responsibility of everybody across industry, including our providers, to really make it known that this active engagement that gets you to that dosage is what really drives meaningful learning for students. And the more that we can talk about that in terms of what strong implementation looks like, I think the better off we're going to be in continuing to increase the usage of these tools in the classroom that's humanizing, that's responsible, and that actually leads to outcomes for kids.
That's a really important point in that we can't just have, tools, or it's like a textbook that you use once a month. It's just kind of the same thing. The ed tech tools can't just be, touched on 30 minutes a week, like you mentioned, that they have to go with the appropriate dosage. And what does that mean in the classroom? I think it means, we're looking at the amount of dosage for a particular tool, and then we're looking at quality tools rather than a quantity of tools in the school. So it'll be interesting to see as more and more schools adopt OBC how they become a little more selective in the tools that are used. Can you tell us a little bit about what research is showing when schools implement an outcomes-based contract?
Yeah, absolutely. So we just had a report released from Digital Promise. They did a study of the implementation of our first EdTech cohort. And what they found is that the dosage increased significantly as a part of engagement in the OBC. In their report, they cite at least 10 times higher dosage rates under an outcomes-based contract as compared to a typical EdTech intervention implementation. And so we're talking about moving from a single super user within either a district or, a school site, all the way into an entire district being a super user of their EdTech product, right? Now that is data magic, because what that creates is a ton of information about what's working for whom under what conditions. how students are engaging in the platform so that the provider and district can partner side by side to really understand how do we improve instruction for our kids. And then the ancillary benefit of that beyond that direct relationship is that the provider is able to learn more about what does it actually take at a systems level to effectively implement this tool in a district, right? And so then they're able to take those learnings and use the tools that they're developing for that partner within an OBC to create better, stronger implementation tools across the sector, right? And so then the other thing that came out of the Digital Promise Report beyond the super users and the super increased dosage is that when they went into classrooms and when they observed what was happening with children and talked with teachers and talked with district leaders and providers, what they learned is that under an OBC, the EdTech tool becomes a coherent part of the classroom experience. And so everybody from the district all the way down into the classroom understands what's required. And most importantly, what is the outcome that they're seeking in order to improve things for students. So that's been a really exciting finding in terms of like everybody talking about how we create those coherence across the ecosystem, how we, don't just have ed tech tools sitting on shelves going unused, how we avoid passive screen time, right? And a lot of those things can be strengthened, I would say, through outcomes-based contracting. It is by no means a silver bullet. You have to start with that baseline of, is this tool safe, interoperable? Does it protect student data and privacy? Does it have an evidence base? Is it designed with user needs in mind? And all of the different standards that are so important for baseline, this is what quality ed tech looks like. What the OBC does is it takes that quality and then supercharges it to implement effectively and have that overall coherent experience for, of course, the most important user, the students within our classrooms.
Thank you. So well said. And thank you for calling out the 5 EdTech quality indicators there. I caught that. I'm very interested. One thing you mentioned is the systems. And as you're talking about the district, the school building, the classroom, that means that a district's systems need to evaluate how are they supporting teacher learning tools, understanding how to implement them, building out lesson plans that include the tools that they've selected. And I think that's a struggle that I've seen in districts over many implementations and years. Have you seen that change, and what does that look like for support for implementation on both the vendor and the district and the classroom folks?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we are not advising on like how to do that like important and messy work of like how to embed this within your instruction. What we're saying is there are a lot of experts that are able to figure that out. But as a district, as a provider, as a system, you have to create the conditions that it is coherent for them to figure out by naming, these are the outcomes that we want to achieve for this specific student population. If we want to achieve those outcomes, and by the way, this is the way we're going to measure them, and this is what we're accountable for and what the provider is accountable for, then the humans that are the experts on how to do that work effectively in the classroom have those enabling conditions in order to create that coherence in their own classrooms. And so one of the things we frequently hear when we're doing partner visits where we go out and observe instruction in the classroom under an OBC with the provider, the district, and the center is that every classroom looks a little bit different in terms of how they're implementing it. But the thing that remains consistent is the clarity and quality of the implementation, right? And that can look a lot of different ways. And so I think that that's one of the really exciting findings that's emerging is even across school sites, implementation can look very different as long as you keep one thing consistent. And that is that you're committed to using the product at the proper dosage aligned with the research base. And you're committed, everybody, to figuring out how you get the outcomes that are most important for the students that are supposed to be served. And then our instructional experts, they can figure out the rest of it if you give them those clear kind of signals of what quality looks like.
That's such an important point to have that clarity because, yeah, the experts are in the classrooms and the districts. And when there's uncertainty, not everything's going to be done with fidelity, but when there's clarity, there's kindness, there's ability to make those decisions and use that expertise. So thank you for lifting that up. Well, I'm curious what's next for OBC. Do you have any current or upcoming projects or events that you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, I would be happy to. So everything that we have is always current on our website. If you just Google outcomes-based contracting, then you'll find our website very easily. And with that, we have a couple of different opportunities upcoming in the next school year for both providers and our districts. We have a district contract accelerator program that will outline kind of like how you developed your own outcomes-based contracting. We've done an accelerated model now that we've learned so much from our district partners to date. And so would recommend district leaders check out that opportunity to just really build your own first OBC alongside some staff at the center. And then for providers, we have a provider learning series, which is specifically designed for providers to learn the ins and outs of outcomes-based contracting from a provider perspective in order to go and sell this work to your district partners. We're seeing a lot of providers thinking of this as a competitive edge. And so that's our current offering for our provider partners. And if you're just like interested in learning more, we have an impact section on our website, and we have a lot of resources that are open source that you can download. Our standards, our contract templates, our RFP templates, all of that for high impact tutoring and EdTech interventions is live on our website. So feel free to download those so that you can learn more about the work and try it out in your own context.
Thank you, Brittany, so much for sharing your expertise and your experience today and for contributing to the data magic. We're really, really grateful for your time.
Great. Thanks so much, Tisha. Glad to be here. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too. Thank you for joining us today for Data Magic. If this conversation sparked a new idea or helped you think about how you approach the world of education data differently, please share it with someone in your network. And if you're working to make your systems more connected, more usable, more human-centered, we invite you to sign the Project Unicorn Pledge. To learn more about the pledge and how we're advancing data interoperability in education, visit us at projectunicorn.org. Because better data isn't just about systems, it's about supporting every student every day.